continuing. Not just the trials he goes through personally, but the official trials that are held in regards to him. But they will now take place in what we call the Gentile world. The Jews have had their trials, have had their say, and now they need to get the Gentiles or the Romans involved. And so Jesus is going to appear before the Gentile authorities. The first trial they will have will be in front of Pilate. But then Pilate hears that Jesus was from Galilee, so he sends him to Herod. So the second trial is before Herod. The third trial is back in front of Pilate again. So there's 3 more trials we're looking at, and today is just the first part of the fun. I want us to keep in the back of our mind as we study through this section and we read about Pilate, and he speaks a lot during this time, and he questions Jesus and Jesus answers him. I want us to keep in the back of our mind that at first, when Pilate meets Jesus, he's just another Jewish person to him. He has no thought of who he is or anything about him. He believes that he has not done anything, that the Jews have brought him for bad reasons. And eventually, Pilate works to try to get Jesus released. And we see that in John 19, verse 12, the beginning section forth, Pilate sought to release him. So prayerfully in the days to come, as we study through this section, I'll be able to point out to you some of the different ways in which Pilate was trying to get Jesus released. He really didn't want to put Jesus to death. And so in another, when I preached on this at another time, I entitled the message Between a Rock or the Rock and a Hard Place. You know, we use that expression, right? No matter which way you go, it's a hard way to go. So between the rock, Jesus Christ, and a hard place as he continues through these trials. He is working at some points to save the life of Jesus. Now let me kind of give some background as to what's taken place. The Sanhedrin are leading Jesus to Pilate to be executed. They don't even care if there's a trial. In fact, they would prefer that Pilate not even have a trial, that he would go straight to execution. The Sanhedrin just want Jesus dead. They want him off the scene, out of there. They don't want him around anymore. And then you come to John 18, verse 28, where it says, Then they, that being the Sanhedrin, led Jesus from Caiaphas unto the hall of judgment, and it was early. And they themselves went not into the judgment hall, lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. So what you have to understand is located near the temple of Jerusalem was a judgment hall of the Sanhedrin. So they're leading Jesus from there where they supposedly officially have condemned him to death just a short time earlier, and they march partway across the city to another judgment hall. But this one is the Gentile judgment hall. This is the place where Herod and where Pilate would be making their judgments. And so they just kind of march across the city. They go from one judgment hall to another. One they're very comfortable being in. The second one, when they come to Pilate, they won't even go into the judgment hall because they wanted to eat Passover, and we'll see that in a few moments. The Gentile hall of judgment is a building that would be referred to, if you ever read up on this, called the Praetorium. That's what they called the Roman or the Gentile judgment hall, the Praetorium. And so you see that sometimes in reading about this. So you'd have all these people, the temple guards, the Sanhedrin, the temple police, bringing Jesus across the city to Pilate. And at this point, John picks up the story again. And this is phase one of the first Roman trial from a Gentile court. You have to kind of think through in your imagination how dramatic. I mean, this was just so dramatic. You have the people involved. You have the characters that they were. You have the personalities of it involved, and they're clashing. And the people are sinful and wicked. Every person involved in this whole story at this point is sinful and wicked and not doing anything for God except for Jesus Christ. You look at this whole picture, and he's the only one who is standing there doing what is right. And all of them are, to one extent or another, guilty for carrying out the injustices that have been done and will be done to Jesus Christ. The only innocent one in this whole drama is Jesus Christ. So the one they are accusing is perfectly pure. He is righteous. He is the victim. He is mocked. He is despised. He is ridiculed, and he is eventually sentenced to death. And yet he stands there as the only one who is pure and majestic, and his life is shining through the darkness of that which has taken place to him through these men's actions and decisions. Let me remind you of some of the major players that you have here. Of course, there's Annas. He's the retired high priest who's really the brains behind the whole Jewish religious system of greed at that point. He's really the one ruling through all the other high priests that have come. You have his son-in-law, Caiaphas, and he's there. And the rest of the high priests are there. And the Sanhedrin are there. And they're supposed to be the most respected, highest members of Jewish society. And you're supposed to have the scribes there. And they're supposed to make sure that everything is done according perfectly to the law of God and to the law of the Jews. And so you have all these things, all these people from a Jewish perspective there. Entering the scene for us today is a man by the name of Pilate. We know him as Pontius Pilate. He's the Roman governor. In reality, he is in charge of the whole nation of Israel. There's other people who are working under him. You have Herod Antipas. You have Herod Archelaus. You have Herod Philip. And these all are under Herod. Pilate's really in charge. And so he has a lot of power from Rome. There's a Roman authority that set up the Herods as kings. And they are really false kings from the line of Esau. And so you have a crowd that eventually be gathered together. And that crowd that is eventually gathered together are going to be screaming for the blood of who? Jesus Christ. And what are they going to be saying? Two simple words. What should I do with this one called Christ? And they'll be led in that screaming two words by the chief priests and so forth. And they're going to cry out what? Crucify him. Crucify him. You'll see that eventually. And so that's what they're interested in doing. And yet, in the middle of it all, stands Jesus Christ in his beauty, in his glory, in his majesty and purity and his righteousness. We should not be surprised. He is, after all, the Son of God, the blameless, holy Christ. He is even called the innocent one. The gospel accounts continue to state that Jesus had done nothing wrong. And we will see that as we study through here from the lips of Pilate, from the lips of Herod, and still he is put to death. We see this even in other scriptures. Luke 23:47. The centurion states, after Jesus had died on the cross and he was there witnessing it, and he stood by the cross of Jesus, he looks up and he says, certainly this was a righteous man. You can go to 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 21, where Paul wrote and said, for he hath made him, Jesus Christ, to be sin for us, who knew no sin. He did not know sin. He had no sin charged to him that we might be made the righteousness of God in him. We could go to Hebrews 7:26. Speaking of Jesus Christ, for such an high priest became us. Describe him. Okay, he is holy. He is harmless. He is undefiled. He is separate from sinners and made higher than the heavens. And that's the one who they're condemning to death. That's the one who they're going to beat within a shred of his life. That's the one they're going to hang on a tree. And Peter would go on to say in 1 Peter 2:22, who found in his mouth. So on and on you go. Here's the innocent one. And yet he's proclaimed to be guilty and condemned. Well, the more the people are working against Jesus to have him put to death, the brighter he stands.